Okay, welcome for another episode of Mind the Gap. This time we'll have a special. We had a talk with Glen Coker last week, and he agreed to do a chat with our good friend Jackson Wheat. So, first of all, welcome back, Glen. Nice to have you here. We had a little bit of a struggle setting the time. Most of it was my fault, by the way. Jackson missed one time, and then from there on, I just kept screwing up with the time. So at least thanks for being so nice and keeping up with the ever-changing times for this show. That's
no problem at all. Glad to be here.
My apologies for the bad handling of that. My task here will be moderating. Knowing Jackson, I'll just be sitting in the back listening and enjoying the talk. So I'll hand it over to Jackson. Jackson, welcome.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been a while.
Yeah. And so you just pitched us that you have a little bit of good news. Some of the people, someone who you used in one of your videos left a response on your video. So was he satisfied with your work? And can you tell the people who it was?
Oh yeah, it's Ruhif. He runs a blog by the same name, and he saw my chromosome 2 video where I used at least one article of his talking about the research, and I use that term loosely, that Jerry Bergman and Jeffrey Tompkins had done back in 2013 and earlier about how the chromosome 2 head-to-head fusion wasn't really a fusion. It was just a region that looked like a fusion.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So he saw it and he said, "Yay, I'm famous."
He's famous because he's in your video. So that
take away from that what you will.
Yeah, that'll make our channel famous because now you're here. we get even more out of that. So yeah, as I said, I'll just sit back. I don't know, Glen, if you have any questions for Jackson prepared. So maybe it's good to have you pitch in the first question so we can take it from there.
Sure. I did jot down a couple questions prepared, but of course am maybe willing to go other directions too, obviously. But I'll throw maybe this one out there because it kind of relates to the conversation we were having last week. Jackson, I guess my question would kind of be like this: if in your view, in your scientific view, and all your experience, in your opinion, what is the best argument as to why the deeper discovery and understanding of the process and mechanisms of evolution eliminate a designer of that process?
Well, I wouldn't say that they do necessarily. Evolution can exist perfectly well right alongside anyone's deity. That's why there are so many people of faith who accept evolution, and very many scientists today, such as Francis Collins, Robert Bacher, etc., are absolutely wonderful scientists. They do terrific work. They've very much expanded our understanding of evolution in various ways. And so I wouldn't say evolution at all eliminates a designer. I would say the process of evolution means you don't need a designer to make to create the biodiversity on Earth, but that doesn't mean that designer doesn't exist necessarily. Did I answer that satisfactorily?
Yeah. What would you maybe in that answer? What would you consider the likelihood of the designer entering the scenario? Does that make sense?
Do I consider it likely that a designer has done things in the past?
No. If I guess what I'm saying is if evolution, in essence, doesn't really eliminate the idea of a designer of that process, the process of evolution itself, at what point do you think it's most likely that designer, obviously God, would have begun the process or inserted themselves in that process? Would it be the lightning strike on the first, water in the earth? You see what I'm saying? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm a little confused by the question, I must say. Are you saying is it likely? I think the first time I asked was, is it likely that a designer has contributed to evolution or to life?
No, that wasn't the first question. The first question was really why
sorry.
does it eliminate it? I mean, you answered the first question, great. By the way,
Okay.
I'm sure that I'm not being as clear as I need to be, so I'm sure it's me.
I mean, I might just
But
be being obtuse right now, and I'm
yeah,
misunderstanding.
and I'm talking in the theoretical right now, not necessarily in what you believe or don't believe, or what you support or don't support. But if evolution doesn't eliminate the need for, or the likelihood or the possibility of a designer, where do you think possibly that designer would have inserted itself? Was it just before the Big Bang, or
Oh, well,
you see what I'm saying?
okay. Yeah. Well, personally, I don't believe in any designer, but if you were to ask, uh, you know, someone like Francis Collins, for instance, he would say that God, entered the world and, you know, uh, around the switch from BC to AD and became Jesus, and that was God in the flesh. That's what he would say, and that's what other Christians who accept evolution would say. I would think is that they have no problem with with the biblical story of Jesus, and things like that. But they are able to separate these natural processes that we can understand, we can test and make predictions based on, and their religious beliefs. At least in my experience, they're able to distinguish between those, and they understand that these things don't need to necessarily go together. Where there's something supernatural, like God becoming Jesus or whatever, then that's something God did. That's not a natural process. And so there's a sort of separation. I don't really want to say compartmentalization because it sounds negative, but that is in a sense what I think it is.
Okay.
Appreciate I'm sorry. Did I answer?
Yeah, you did. Yeah, you sure did.
Okay.
And I don't mean to corner you and to say what do you believe. I'm just curious in the theoretical. If there was a designer, what would you say would be the most likely point?
If I did believe in a designer, and it happened to be the Christian one, I guess, then I would probably believe the Jesus narrative, and that there is a God outside of the universe, whatever, watching us, looking over our shoulder to make sure things are going all right and that sort of thing. But if I were a Christian, I think that's what I would say, probably.
Great.
Yeah, I have no problem with anyone's belief, and I do want to make this clear. I have no problem with anyone's belief in the existence of a God. Belief in God doesn't make you any better or worse a scientist or anything like that. can be a perfectly good scientist, like I mentioned Francis Collins, and be a believer. It's, has really no effect on the science. As long as you are able to separate the science from the beliefs. The problem becomes then when there's a need by people like Ken Ham and Ancestry, or we were talking about the creation ministries, things like that, when there is a rejection of natural phenomena that we can see based on the evidence, and there's a necessity to insert God to do all these little things, all these other things. And so that's where things become problematic, I think.
Yeah, I would lean towards the idea that God created the process and just, it works. It continues to work, kind of like the ecosystem. We see it just
Okay.
work automatically.
Are you and someone? Do you think that the Earth is, like, for instance, billions of years old?
I do and I don't, and that's kind of a complicated answer in a way, and it's an answer that I don't get a lot of support on, but I'll throw it out there if you want to hear it.
Okay.
I tend to believe that if once that God, he has the ability to, let's talk on the ifs here. If he has the ability to create what we see now as the universe, the complexity, the amazing, the way things work together, and the complexity of it all, and the mathematical likelihoods of it not having worked out on its own, but it did work out, and so on and so forth. All those, what some people might call, I guess, the cosmological arguments. If he has that ability to do that, then he has the ability to create something in midterm of its cycle, if that makes sense.
Right. Well, I mean, if we were to follow... sorry, go ahead.
And in doing so, I used a volcano analogy in our last conversation, but in doing so, he creates what I would call the history of it also.
Right. One, I guess, potential objection I would see to that is when we have the evidence to indicate that something has been cycling naturally, we don't need to insert the supernatural. And this is seen even in, creationists and evolutionists can both agree that certain processes occur entirely naturally. They don't need God to intervene for these processes, but why? It's because we both recognize that there is evidence to support these things happening naturally. So all we have to do is use evidence to extend that thinking. It's like, okay, if this can happen naturally, do we have evidence to support that this other thing happened naturally? And, if we do, then we can understand that process does in fact happen. And then you just keep going on like that. The places where both sides disagree, creationists obviously, don't, or young earth creationists, to be specific, don't think the Earth is billions of years old. It's some 10,000 years, something like that. And so God was necessary to start the Earth, right? To create life, right. Things like that. And so is because they don't believe that there's evidence to support, these natural, or to explain these phenomena that we would see as completely natural, normal phenomena. And so with evolution, because it's, in a lot of respects, it's very well understood. Of course, there are still lots of respects for there's much more research that needs to be done. But in the respects where it is very well understood, we can make predictions off of it based on the idea that evolution has gone on cycling for millions of years, and we can understand it, things like that. The Earth is not 6,000 to 10,000 years old, whatever. And so we make predictions on that sort of idea. There have been lots of predictions made on it, a lot of verified predictions. And so, can you still hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. My mic fell out. Sometimes it completely disrupts everything.
Oh, you're still here.
Okay, good. So, long story short, to me, if we have evidence to suggest that some phenomena has been occurring naturally and we have evidence to support it, then we should follow that evidence to its conclusion.
How far back would you say we can scientifically step and prove those processes moving back? How far back do you feel is reasonable that we can say, okay, we know this stuff?
Well, I would say, well, for one thing, when you say no, certainty is one thing that is very rare in science, extremely rare, even in things that we're very, very confident in our ability to understand, right? Because all conclusions in science are tentative, but we can use evidence to support these ideas. And when you have an idea like evolution, which is extremely, extremely, extremely well supported over the past 150 years or so, then we can say, yeah, we're very confident in the idea of evolution. But do we know for certainty, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that evolution is what has occurred in the past? Well, technically, no. It could be, mischievous God who is, laid the evidence to test us or what have you, or the devil, So, so to answer your question, I guess the evidence, we can follow the evidence as far back as it will lead. Before anyone was studying the fossils, we had no idea, or before anyone was studying rocks and fossils, we had no idea how old the Earth was. Right? We had no way to look. We had no one looking into the past, and then once we started to study it, our understanding of the deep history of Earth got deeper and deeper and deeper. In Charles Darwin's time, the earliest fossils are from the Cambrian. In 1947, I think we found the first fossils from the Precambrian. And then since then, it's just gone back and back and back, and we understand the Earth, based on like thermodynamics and things like that, started around 4.5 billion years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can follow the evidence as far back as it will lead. We just have to have evidence to support the idea. That's my thoughts on that.
Okay. I was watching a video on your channel this week, and basic stuff, or how did life begin, those kinds of things, and this video covered, and it talked about how that first strand of DNA was pulled itself together in the ocean after the lightning strike, and so on and so forth. It struck me that that's a pretty complex situation right then and there, and not long after that, a glob of oil of some type covered it and kept it protected. That seems just so complex to me, just a strand of DNA, and I'm no expert, but to get to that moment and then move forward, to me, is amazing. Right there.
I absolutely agree. But DNA wouldn't have formed first. Theoretically, RNA or some other now extinct nucleic acid would have formed first. Later, much later, DNA came along. But yes, I agree. It's very complex, and there are experiments that have been done looking at different steps in that process. There's actually a really, really intriguing book, if you're interested. It's titled The Vital Question. It's by a guy named Nick Lane. I can put it over here in our side chat. Question. It's a very intriguing book. It's about he's a biochemist, and he does research in the area of abiogenesis, which is the origin of life. And so, yeah, I agree. It's very, very complex stuff. Very interesting. But there's a whole lot of it that's still being worked out. There's a lot we don't know about the origin of life. For instance, fairly recently, the RNA world hypothesis was found to have some errors in it, and so they have to go back to the drawing board in a few different ways. And so, yeah, there's a lot of stuff we don't know. And so, devoted a video talking about I devoted 2 videos talking about abiogenesis, because just how life got here is a study in and of itself, separate from evolution.
Mm-hmm.
Evolution is about population genetics, and so for during abiogenesis, there's no life. So if there's no life, there's no population, and no population genetics, so there's no evolution, right?
Right.
Right. And so yes. So regardless of how or if abiogenesis did in fact happen, maybe God just seeded life on Earth, we still have lots and lots of evidence indicating that evolution has progressed over the billions of years.
Peter, I've got other questions written down, but I noticed there might be chat questions too. I don't want to dominate this.
We had one question from the chat so far. Jackson, if there are questions, I'll put them in the side chat.
Okay.
I'll throw this one in here as well. Old Scratch asked, and I'd like to have a response from both of you on this. Why does all the evidence continue to comport to the theory of evolution? And so, Glenn, if you could answer that one first.
I would say that evolution, at least in the way I understand it and what I've studied, what I've listened to, it's undeniable that it exists. It's just a matter of when you step back and farther back, even to what caused the Big Bang. If you want to go that far back, that's where the real questions come in. And in my mind, so I am by no means a denier of evolution, especially on the microevolution side. And maybe that's something we want to discuss too, is macroevolution, Jackson. But and maybe that leads to. But before I ask that question, I certainly want to let you comment on his question.
Okay. Well, I'll scratch the reason that all evidence continues to comport the theory of evolution is that it's a very well supported theory. It has undergone a lot of revision over the years, and so it allows us to make predictions and things like that. And so I think it'd be pretty big deal if there were some piece of evidence out there that just completely overturned evolution. But it does it. So I guess to answer your question, evolution is supported, and that's how you build scientific theories. You build them on the evidence, and if the evidence doesn't favor your theory, then you have to build a new theory, or a new hypothesis, I should say, and then that can become a theory eventually if enough evidence should support it. So
yeah, I'd also like to say that everything that comes up in this conversation, I'll put that in the description. So I put in a link to Amazon to Nick Lane's book, The Vital Question.
Well, thank you.
For people who want to check it out.
It's a fascinating book.
Yeah, I'll check it out myself. So there was also a quick mention of because Glenn, you used it a couple of times, the lightning strike. It's more of a metaphor for an energy source that was present. So it's not part of the actual explanation. The could have been several different ways, and I also think it didn't start with DNA. There was a lot leading up to getting DNA, and the first DNA, I think we can all agree on, isn't near similar to what we see today. It would have been a very rudimentary form, because we know, because the mutations, DNA changes over time, so it would have been a very, very rudimentary form. And so DNA is still just chemical reactions, and it's it's an accumulation of chemical reactions which then trigger other chemical reactions, and that's what turns out to be people, animals, plants, what have you. So um, as far as life goes, um, the best knowledge so far is that even life is just a chemical reaction. It's it's precious to us, of course, because if we didn't have life, we wouldn't exist. But it is in fact just a chemical reaction. And so um, I'd like to throw it back to Jackson because there are an awful lot of misconceptions within creationism. What would you think is the biggest misconception? And maybe Glenn can respond to that as well.
Okay. I think perhaps the largest misconception is what exactly evolution is. Because I think that term is used, it's thrown around a lot, like, or it's equated with Darwinism, or what have you. Uh, and so I have to ask, or I have to say that, Glenn, if you want, I do actually have a developing series right now, titled "How Evolution Works," where I go through the different steps of evolution. And so if you're interested,
Sure.
yeah,
Sure.
because I did a talk recently, and I did a talk with the creationist who was convinced evolution doesn't exist. It's a fraud, to use his word. Um, but then he really couldn't tell me what evolution was or is, you know.
Right.
And so it's
Right.
a little awkward to, It's like, this thing is a fraud. Well, what is it? Ah, that's a good question. What is it? Um, and so at its in its basic form, evolution is really just a matter of organisms develop mutations and genetic variations, and then those can be spread throughout the population by reproduction. They can be selected, and which may eventually become unable to breed with, or which will become unable to breed with the parent population. And that's speciation, which is, and you wanted to talk about macro and microevolution, right?
Right. Yeah, that'd be great.
Right. So microevolution is defined, and I mentioned this briefly in I think my video Mechanisms of Evolution, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong. Uh, Microevolution is just genetic change below the level of species, like the spread of lactose tolerance from Europeans to native North Americans.
Mm-hmm.
That they're just spreading this one gene, so they're not becoming a new species. They're just sharing this gene via reproduction because they're reproducing with Native Americans, and so now that their offspring have this gene,
Right.
and so that's really, that's just microevolution, and like you said, um, and creationists, young earth creationists especially, are always like, yeah, microevolution's fine, but macroevolution is not a thing. Well, macroevolution is actually observable. Uh, Macroevolution is defined as genetic change at or above the level of.
Oops.
Uh-oh. I heard
I
some rustling around, but
Yeah, we lost Greg there for a moment. I'll jump over to Facebook
okay.
and I'll leave him a message that he can
Come
he
back.
can yeah.
In the meantime, I'll distract everyone with my juggling. Da, 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 da.
your go-to thing. I need a separate camera. I could do a couple of magic tricks.
Oh, really?
I have done one so far uh, during a live stream.
You made Dean Esme disappear.
No, I actually did a magic trick.
Oh, okay.
A card trick.
I love card tricks. I had a friend in high school who always did card tricks, and they just blow my mind.
Yeah, well, it's all just a trick. Some of them are quite good. I mean, I've got one that usually will blow people's minds because it's completely impossible what I'm doing, and yet so what I do is close up magic. So people will stand right in front of me, and it'll happen literally just inches away, and they still won't see it. And some of them are quite easy to do. So, um, but it's still funny to do. Uh, I'm not sure if Glenn even realizes that he has gone. He was using a headset, so it could be very possible that if he's using a Bluetooth headset, that he just wandered off a little bit too far from his computer, and that's why we lost the connection. I don't know. Although that shouldn't have gotten him to lose the connection entirely. He's back. Glenn, you're back.
I am back. I apologize. Computer completely crashed, and I had to reboot. I don't know what happened there. Very
Happens to me
strange.
sometimes.
Does it? That's a first for
Yeah.
me. It's been a bad time to do it.
It still happens. That's something they don't seem to get under control, which I think is we need a little bit more evolution in our computers. I think.
It certainly puts you in a bit of a panic mode, that's for sure, for
Yeah.
a few seconds. Apologize for
Okay.
that.
Yeah. So, does any of you remember where we were on what topic? Because I completely lost it after talking about magic.
I was talking about micro and macro evolution.
Oh
Right.
yeah. Okay. Go ahead. I'll go sit in the back.
Okay. Go sit in the corner.
Yeah.
So microevolution is genetic change below the level of species. I gave my example with the spreading the gene because there's not a new species, it's just this genetic change within the species. And so young earth creationists are generally okay with that. They say, all right, fine. But then with macroevolution, macroevolution is also generally not defined in conversations I've had generally with young earth creationists, but it's defined as genetic change at or above the level of species. So by definition, a speciation event where a subpopulation becomes reproductively isolated from its parent population is a macroevolutionary event. And you can observe this in cichlids and fruit flies and hawthorn flies and other things like that. Lots of organisms have been observed speciating. I think flounder also. And so that's what macroevolution is.
What do we have any examples in the fossil record of one species moving into another? Maybe the more proper term is family. Moving into another.
Well, we actually kind of have both. There are examples of species to species transitions. There's a whole concept called a chronospecies, where basically it's very difficult to tell. Well, you basically can't tell when an organism would have been unable to breed with its parental population because of how gradual the transition is between these two species, right? For instance, Australopithecines or within Homo, for instance, Homo erectus and Homo heidelbergensis. Homo heidelbergensis is descended directly from Homo erectus. So that's a species to species transition. And then Homo sapiens, us, are descended directly from Homo heidelbergensis. So that's another species to species transition. And so, yeah, they're out there. There are a whole bunch. If you look at diatoms and foraminifera, which for anyone who doesn't know, they're these little protists that make these calcium carbonate shells that get preserved in the fossil record. And there are loads and loads of them. They undergo lots of speciation events. they're actually used as index fossils, which you can use to determine when a time period starts. And so yeah, there are species to species transitions. Not a whole lot of them, but they do exist.
Can I quickly jump in?
Okay, go ahead.
Because yeah, so I've been doing several talks, and although I know that the examples that you gave are very good examples, what I usually get is, well, yeah, but can you give me an example to something that we have today? And I think one of the best that we have today, and that's easy to find out about, is the evolution from let's say Pakicetus to the modern whales. We can actually see how the nose evolved into a blowhole. You can see the various steps in evolution where you actually see that hole moving up on top of the head. And I think that would be a very good uh, example to have a look at. Have you ever looked at something like that, Glenn?
To some degree, yes. And I guess the way you describe that, I'm not familiar with that example, but the way you describe that sounds to me more micro than macro. In other words,
It
a
actually,
species evolving to become more,
but
healthy or
this is
vibrant.
yeah, but
That's not what.
yeah, this is a four-legged land animal evolving
Oh, I'm sorry, I
into,
misunderstood.
yeah, a
Yeah.
Pakicetus is a four-legged land animal. I don't think what would be the closest relative to Pakicetus, Jackson. I think you're better qualified to answer that one.
The closest like extinct relative or modern
Yeah, or
relative?
let's go with both.
Well, close extinct relative, there's like Ambulocetus, which is a semi-aquatic four-legged cetacean, and then modern descendants are the whales, or
Yeah,
they're at least related to one of Pakicetus's close relatives.
but do we have a relative of an ancestor of Pakicetus that remained a land animal and evolved in an animal we see today? In what kind of
No.
lineage do we have to look?
Um,
That
the closest relatives of the hippos are, or of the whales, are the hippos, and so you can see, and so you've got some uh early Cenozoic artiodactyls, which are even hooved mammals, and so there are some very early ones, but no, I don't think in that specific example that there's any uh, Pakicetus relatives that stayed terrestrial.
okay. And another thing I'd like to touch on maybe is, and that's a difficult one to explain because uh, I usually use the silver fox experiment, and you made a great video about that on my request. Um, but you end up with certain creationists saying, well, it's still a fox. Yes, of course it's still a fox. Um, it I usually say you've got ancestors. So at what point, after how many generations, are your ancestors no longer your ancestors? So if you start out with a fox, it will still be a fox, but the now
Right, right,
I'm lost for word. The description fox will degrade from species to being a family and further down, and
right.
that's I think that's something that is very hard to explain.
How much of that is observable and how much of that is theoretical?
Well, actually, quite a
So
bit of it. Well,
the
the
silver
good
fox
thing about it.
the
Do
silver
it.
fox experiment is very observable. They tried to make more docile foxes and ended up with a completely different animal that was useless because they were breeding the foxes for their fur, and the animals they ended up with had completely different fur. It was a completely different animal. It was if you like more dog-like than it was a fox. But yeah, whatever you do, it will never become a dog because it's a different lineage. It will still be a
Right.
fox.
Right. So what Peter's explaining is cladistics.
Hmm.
Is you're using uh, these different groupings of organisms, and you can show that they're nested within each other. Like
Okay.
for instance, you've got foxes are canids. They're within the dog family, but they're also caniforms, and then carnivorans, and then they're mammals. They're tetrapods. They have 4 limbs. They develop in an amniotic sac. Uh, all these other things. They're nested clades within each other, and so yeah, and so that's what you were going for, right, Peter?
Yeah,
Okay.
and that's still a difficult one to describe to someone who. So Glenn accepts most of evolution, I think, if not all, uh, depending on the terminology you use. But that's a difficult one to explain to a young Earth creationist who completely rejects evolution. And so, um,
Well, I think
there's
if you're a young Earth creationist, uh, and you, which I am, but I'm not gonna deny that I am, but to not realize that uh, some sort of evolution exists. For instance, if you're a young Earth creationist and we happen to know that there's stars that are millions of light years away from us right now. We just know that. You have to square some way in your mind how that light is reaching us now if the Earth is 6,000 years old.
Mhm.
And that
But
that's
have
a
you have
that's
you
a
ever
tough thing to say, well, no, it doesn't exist
Mhm.
without squaring those things up.
but have you ever thought about the mechanics involved? Let's just for the sake of argument say that it is a young Earth. Um, so do you also ascribe to Noah's flood being real?
I do, yes.
Okay, so let's go with that. If Noah's flood happened and we see millions of different creatures walking the earth today over a period of time, roughly 4,000 years, uh, either Noah would have needed several arcs to put all the animals on, or we would have some mega turbo evolution happening to get to the diversity that we see now, because it would be virtually impossible for him to take all the animals we see today on the ark. So
Yeah, the best.
how do you think that we got to the diversity after just 4,000 years?
I'm a I'm a debate nut. I love seeking out debates, podcast form, however, online, and I've heard debates on both sides of this, and they're fascinating to me. And the best understanding I can come away with is that microevolution can happen at a much faster pace than we really realize, than we think. And it relates to dating techniques, and that's one of the things I wrote down here, Jackson, was to get your perspective on dating techniques and how accurate they really are, and those kinds of things. But that's where it comes down for me, that microevolution can happen at such a faster pace than we really realize. And
Okay, so
I think we can take a slice of the analysis picture and think that it's linear from there. And to me, it can be very hyperbolic or whatever. It can be much different based
Mm,
on conditions, possibly.
can can I throw in the argument that Bill Nye used against Ken Ham? Because if that would have happened, he did a calculation, and that would mean that we would see 11 brand new species every day, and that's not what we observe. So um, it would be a very weird kind of evolution happening very fast in let's say the first 1,000
It would
years, and then
also
and then slowing down.
it would also necessarily include macroevolution. Lots and lots and lots of macroevolution. They just,
Yeah.
they don't like to use that term in young Earth creationist literature, but it would involve macroevolution on a scale that no one has ever seen before.
The best explanation I've heard for that is that with regards to the actual account, the biblical account of Noah's flood, the oceanic creatures were a whole separate category. They weren't anything that needed to be carried on the ark. It was just land animals, land creatures. And so that's when you start, from my understanding, what I've been exposed to, when you start realizing that, then a lot of that starts making a little more sense.
I'd still have a problem because 99% of all animals that have ever lived are extinct, and that's an awful lot. And to be able to fit that in a 6,000-year model would already be nearly impossible, because that would put evolution on a rate even higher. So wouldn't you think that there's a problem there? And also, wouldn't it be strange for a god, for instance, to have dinosaurs on the ark, just so they would die off immediately after the ark landed again?
Well, I would like to, I think there's a whole lot of arguments that we've kind of put
No,
in
go ahead.
together.
Right.
Go ahead.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, my internet is going haywire, and so if I drop out, then you'll know why.
Okay.
But so I kind of want to go back to that macroevolutionary issue, because we can look at a number of different methods, genetics, paleontology, biogeography, that organisms have never ever speciated at the rate necessary to meet what the ark would have put out at any point in Earth's history. And so I would have to ask, well, what evidence do we have that they would have completely gone against what we do observe both today and in the fossil record? What evidence do we have that speciation was much faster in the past?
So that would lead to my question to you, Jackson, about dating techniques and how accurate they are, and what do we hang our hat on as far as just knowing that they are as accurate as, or as accurate as we say today, as it covers the time span that we say they do today.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah. A little roboting, but other than that, good.
I think my internet's going crazy again. So I think, or from what I understand, dating methods are very reliable. We can use a number of different methods to cross-confirm each other, and we can use independent methods to confirm what radiometric dates say. And we also don't have to just use radiometric dating. We can use things like, we can use molecular clocks to look at these things, which can be calibrated against fossils. And so there's lots of different methods. But yeah, radiometric dating, it's very, or it's, in a lot of cases, it's very accurate. There's been a lot of work done on it over decades. I mean, heck, even in construction of our understanding biblical history, carbon dating has been especially useful in illuminating when different passages of the Bible were written. For instance, there was a movie that came out fairly recently titled Fragments of Truth. Did you see it?
No, I did not. No, I wasn't aware of that.
Okay, so this Fragments of Truth. It's about how, and I'm not saying their arguments were, good or bad, but one of the things they pointed out, well, the point of the movie, the premise of the movie is that the Bible or biblical stories have not changed, as some people claim. Some people are saying that, Bible stories have just changed wildly over the centuries. But the point of this movie is showing here these really old pieces of the Bible that, found a long time ago, and they're the same as the Bible is today, right? And so part of the movie was really interesting, was explaining how they use carbon dating, and cross confirm carbon dating with the type of writing that is used in the early biblical fragments.
Mm-hmm.
Like they might have some, like they'll look at some piece that's, they say, oh, this sort of writing puts it between 180 and 200 AD. Carbon dating says it's between, 100 and 200 AD. And it's not that accurate, but for the sake of argument, we'll just say that's what they say. And so the cross confirmation is that sliver from 180 to 200 AD. So you can say the earliest this was written was 180 AD, right? And so carbon dating is confirmed by looking at the text itself. And so, yeah, I would say, and that's just one example. There are lots and lots of examples of ways we can cross-confirm these dating methods. I spent part of a video talking about it. The video was, we all have the same data in Genesis, Paradise Lost, because that radiometric dating was brought up in that movie. And so I talked about it there. Or I talked about it in a video I did reflecting on that movie. But yeah, they're very accurate.
I heard a very fascinating conversation in recent times about apparently they've found some, in recent times, dinosaur bones that have carbon-14 in them.
Nope.
I believe it was in the bone marrow or something, and that did not square up with the half-life and all that of carbon-14.
Because it's false. No one's found it.
Are you aware of that conversation or that?
Oh yes, I've heard that claim. It's false.
Okay.
No one has ever. Well, I guess unless we were talking about bird fossils, because birds are dinosaurs, but but as for non-avian dinosaurs, no, that has never happened. That claim has been made. One of the sources of that claim, if I remember correctly, was one of the creationists, and he said he went on a dig and he found the fossils himself, but he never turned any of them over to be studied by paleontologists, so we just have to take his word for it, right? But if you look in the scientific literature on dinosaur fossils, of which there is absolutely astounding amount of technical literature, no one has ever found carbon-14 in dinosaur fossils or non-avian dinosaur fossils.
Okay.
That's never happened. But there have a lot of people bring up the soft tissue thing as one.
Yeah, that too. Yeah, that too. I remember that. Yes.
Well, yeah, that I would recommend. Do you read technical literature?
Not very often, no, but I'm willing to.
Okay. For instance, I think if you want, the best place to go for information on these topics is Google Scholar. So if you type in Mary Schweitzer, Schweitzer, she is one of a number of paleontologists who have done research in that area. And their research has yielded that actually the soft tissue can be preserved quite well over millions of years. They've done a lot of research with iron, for instance, and its preservative properties. That's fun to say. And so, I actually have I talked a little bit about that in the same video. We all had the same data in Genesis Paradise Lost, but I also talked about it in a video titled Mark Armitage, because someone asked me to look up information on this guy who had he was a young Earth creationist, and he ran a microscopy lab, and he'd been fired, and he basically lied about why he'd been fired. And so someone asked me to do research on him, so I did. I made a video about him. I guess I can put that in the side chat if you want. Mark Armitage. There you go. I talked a little, and that intersects with the soft tissue issue.
If you want, Jackson, pitch me the links to your videos
Okay.
that have been mentioned here, and then
Too
I
many.
can put then I can put those in. I already have a link to your channel, but I can put in several specific videos to that.
Yeah.
I also put in a link to the search engine you mentioned, which is scholar.google.com.
Yes.
If people want to find out anything, I really urge you to use that link instead of the normal Google search engine.
Yeah, absolutely. Because with Google search, if you type in anything, you can get. I mean, if you want to know something about, like what kind of medicine should I take, you're going to end up with stuff like, well, don't take medicine. Use herbal tea. It'll make all of your dilemmas go away. Things like that. And so you just if you're looking for research information, don't use the Google search. It will lead you astray a lot of times.
Yeah, just enough to be dangerous, huh?
Right. Yeah, and so so the soft tissue thing is not really an issue for evolution or for the old age of the Earth, and that being that there is a fair understanding of course, a building understanding, a growing understanding of why these things happen, because we don't have all the answers. We don't claim to. But see, there you go. That's for the Mark Armitage one. But yeah, so it doesn't really affect the old age of the Earth, and so yeah. So do you have other questions?
Actually, if I can maybe circle back to my first question about related to, does evolution eliminate the idea of a designer of that process? And if I heard you right, your answer was there are plenty of theist evolutionary people that believe in evolution,
Yes.
scientists. And would you say, what percentage would you say of evolutionary biologists are theists, and what percentage are not theists or atheists? What do you have any feel for that?
I have no idea. The ones I've worked with, they seem predominantly non-theist. Of course, I've worked with only a very few, and so I have no idea what the metrics are on that worldwide. I just have no idea.
I would, I guess then my question would be, if in your experience most are non-theists, but the idea of the evolutionary process doesn't eliminate a designer of it, why would you think that is? Why would you think most are atheists?
I don't know. I mean, everyone has, his or her own various different reasons for being a Christian or, Muslim or atheist or whatever. I've no idea why as a whole, or I guess why on average, if it is the case that there are more biologists, whatever. I just don't know. I've never really been, I guess, especially interested to look into that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I just really haven't thought about it a whole lot.
Do you do much study or understanding of maybe more of as far as evolution goes, the evolution of morality and culture and things like that, or is it more the physical side of things?
Yeah, primarily on my channel, especially, I just look mostly at the evolution of life generally, but I think there are very interesting studies on the evolution of different cultures and moral systems and things like that.
I'll ask you this, and if it's something that isn't, in your expertise, or you'd rather not comment on, I understand, but in the studies I've done, modern psychology, they distinguish very clearly between guilt and shame. Okay. And they say guilt is healthy because it makes us go the right direction, but shame is very unhealthy. Shame hurts us actually. It actually makes us unhealthy. Do you have any idea why in the evolutionary picture, why shame would ever have developed if it's unhealthy? Guilt, I understand, but not shame.
It could be a natural byproduct of something else. Not all things necessarily have to have directly naturally selective causes. Sometimes things are produced as a result of something else. So in a sense, it kind of produced accidentally.
Mm-hmm.
And so that it might be the reason for that. I have absolutely no idea, but I think that's interesting. Usually people tend to focus more on the altruism thing because people are like, oh, if evolution's all about selfish genes, how could altruism develop? Right.
Yeah. I've come to understand that when it comes to those kinds of issues, morality, altruism, all those things, I think, believers and atheists and believers are all the same. We all share the same characteristics. I think it's somewhat egotistical to think that we're different.
Oh, I agree.
Better.
I mean,
Yeah,
what I meant was, no, I agree with that. What I meant was, how they could have evolved, how something like altruism could have evolved.
Oh, right.
Usually that's where people go with the morality thing. And so, but
it fascinates me that the difference between guilt and shame, and it's backed up by secular modern psychology, that there's such a difference, and one is so super healthy and one is so damaging to us. And how do we explain that?
Right.
In the evolutionary picture.
Right. I don't know. I mean, that's it's an interesting question. I'm not trained as a psychologist, but I think it is an interesting question. Do you have any other questions?
I think you've pretty well. I mean, I got a couple minor ones, but I don't. It's nothing that hasn't already kind of been covered in general.
Okay.
So
we still have one from the chat.
Okay.
And that's one for Glenn. Why do you think a lack of current understanding in a particular area has to mean that it must have been God who did that?
I don't. I mean, that's not my response to. Okay, I have a lack of understanding. I think it's called God of the gaps, right? Mm-hmm. I don't think we need to plug God in to find that answer, because as we know, we've found those answers over and over again in science, right? And so that's not really where I come from. I see science as the discovery of the amazing process that was put in place, the discovery of the factory, what I like to call the factory of evolution. I think it's mind-boggling, amazing. Once we go a certain distance back from, at least from what I understand, it starts to become theoretical, but we have real solid physical understanding to a certain point back that is just fascinating, completely fascinating. And I think science can explain all of that, but my perspective on science is the discovery of that created factory, if that makes any sense.
Okay. I would like to ask a question because this is a term you've used a few times, and so I'm interested to know what you mean by it. You say once we go back to a point, it all becomes theoretical. What do you mean by that?
Well, like in that video I watched this week on your channel, it wasn't one made by you, but it was something you had linked to, the idea of how the DNA first formed in the ocean and how the oil glob kind of covered it. To me, I don't think we have fossil records of that. That's theoretical.
Okay. So you mean like a process that we haven't figured out yet, like abiogenesis in that instance.
Right, exactly. That's
Okay.
all theoretical. It's
Okay.
We can go back a certain distance in time and in the fossil record to say this is what we definitely know. Then we're kind of moving into theory. Not to say the theory doesn't make sense, but we're kind of in the theory.
Okay. So my other question then is, so did you say earlier that you are a young Earth creationist?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
So you don't think that, for instance, humans have evolved from any other species?
Not in reality. No. I think
Not in reality.
I guess what I'm saying is, once again, go to the volcano analogy.
I don't know
if God is that
powerful,
yeah, if God is that powerful. So okay, let me spell that out again. So if we can all relate to this. Back when we were in elementary school, we had to do science projects, and some kids would pick the volcano, right? The typical make a volcano, and they would, when you build that volcano for your science projects, you actually have a choice. Okay, you can take that lump of clay and shape it into the shape of a volcano, and put the tube in it and all that stuff to make it work or simulate a volcano, and you, over a very quick period of time, you form this lump of clay into the shape of a volcano. Okay, or you can throw that lump of clay out in your driveway and wait for nature to shape it for you. In other words, you've sped up the process. You've personally taken the time to speed up the process of making a lump of clay in the shape of a volcano instead of letting natural processes do it that way.
Okay,
that's the way I view creation. Okay, that God picked up a point in time in history and said, okay, I'm going to create it here and we're moving forward. Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, that's not really how evolution works, though. So evolution, we can directly experiment on it, and we can make predictions about life hundreds of millions of years ago based on what we understand about evolution today.
Right.
We have made verifiable predictions about that. So would you say that is important, or?
Oh, sure. I would say, but I guess in the same volcano analogy, what I would say is, if I take a fork and I put ridges in the volcano, maybe you get those little trees and put them on there, and so on and so forth. I have just created a history that never really existed, but it's history.
So wouldn't that? So that would be kind of like the mischievous god or the demon planting fossils.
I've heard some say that in reaction to me saying that, but not if he says it out front.
Well,
not if he says, this is what I did.
Well, okay, so in this case, let's take an example. Tiktaalik, for instance. Tiktaalik is a lobe-finned fish that was its existence, or at least its characteristics, its attributes were predicted many years before it was discovered, right? And so these researchers predicted where this sort of thing should be in the strata if our understanding of the chronology of Earth is correct based on radiometric dating, things like that, and where it should be if our understanding of the evolutionary history of life on Earth is correct. And so they went to the place where they predicted this sort of thing should have left remains, and they found them, and they named them Tiktaalik, and it had characteristics, or has. It's in our possession, but it is no longer living. So is it had or has? I'll leave the comments. Fight amongst yourself in the comments. Anyways,
that's fascinating, by the way.
So yes, it has the characteristics predicted. It's part it's, this it's got these lobe-finned fish characteristics, but also the characteristics of the later tetrapods, the four-legged animals, and also characteristics intermediate between both. And so this was a specific prediction based on a specific understanding of the evolutionary history of life on Earth. And this isn't the only one. This is just one of numerous similar predictions. And so nowhere in the Bible or in any religious text does anyone describe, humans or, tetrapods coming from fish or anything like that. That was something we had to figure out. And then we were able to make predictions based on that idea. And so in that case, I wouldn't really say anyone was saying it up front. This is something we on our own had to figure out. And so it would seem very pernicious to me for them to make a specific prediction, have it be verified, just for us to think that this is in support of our idea. That seems to me very pernicious.
Well, I guess what I would say is the creation account in Scripture comes out and says it was done in 6 days. So what he's saying is, hey, look at everything here. Look at what you see. Study it. And Scripture actually does say, you can understand God and come to know God and be amazed by the creation by studying creation. But he comes out and says, I did this in 6 days. So whatever you find, realize it was done in 6 days. That's, to me, that's when I say it comes out and says, he comes out and says, this is what I did.
What about, the scientists I mentioned earlier, like Francis Collins, Robert Bacher, who are Christians? I mean, Bacher's a Presbyterian minister, but they accept evolution. They understand that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old.
Let me go back to that, if I could, really quick, to that.
Okay.
That star millions of light years away, right? If you're a young Earth creationist, as I am, and we have proven that we can see the light from a star that's at least, hundreds of thousands of light years away, if not millions, okay? And you believe that God created the Earth in 6 days and it was roughly 6,000 to 10,000 years ago, how can you now square in your mind that the light from that star that's 1 million light years away is now reaching us?
Have you read the Answers in Genesis literature on that?
I may have, but I can't remember the answer to that if they have. What is their answer to that?
Oh, Jason Lyle, who's a astrophysicist, proposes that the speed of light is instantaneous, which doesn't square well with theory of relativity. And so they kind of have to. There's kind of a lot of there. And the way I understand it, because I'm not a physics person, is that his attempted solution just does not work. But he also doesn't think that God created the light to seem as though it were billions of years old. I think, like, for example, with my Tiktaalik example, I think he would agree that it would take a pernicious God to make that sort of thing happen, to fulfill this prediction based on evolution if the Earth is only 6,000 to 10,000 years old. Like, God wouldn't do that, or at the very least, why would God do that? What would he gain from doing that? Right.
I don't know that there's anything gained or lost other than just understanding how it works and being amazed by it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in my example, we can show this in this prediction that evolution does work, right? Because we made a prediction based on what we understood, and the thinking was that if evolution is true in this regard, let's test our understanding of it. And it showed in just one of a number of examples that what we are understanding about evolution is in fact the case. That tetrapods did evolve from fish, or in the case of Microraptor, that birds are descended from dinosaurs, from non-avian dinosaurs. Or, with Diarthrognathus, which is a mammal-like reptile, that there was a specific jaw shape that our ancestors went through before becoming, before the transition, the total kind of transition from reptiles, say that word in quotes, the mammal-like reptiles to the true mammals. And so there are all these different predictions that we have made. And I also mentioned chromosome 2 earlier, that we have made based on the understanding that evolution is this natural process that has been cycling on for millions and millions of years. And so if both young earth creationism, or if young earth creationism wants to achieve that level of I guess respect in the scientific community, because by and large, what I do know of biologists is that by and large they are very, very much not creationists, not young earth creationists. It's like over 99% of biologists accept evolution. Over 99%. And so if young earth creationism wants to get that kind of hold in science, it has to have predictability. It has to have testability. And it just doesn't. Theoretically, it should. The hallmark of any good theory is its ability to make predictions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, the guys who predicted that, or who made a prediction about the Big Bang, predicted that there should be like the cosmic microwave background radiation. There should be some leftover of the Big Bang. Or I mentioned, Microraptor and Tiktaalik and Diarthrognathes in the cases of evolution. So we have to have some way to test our ideas. And what we have shown time and time again is that evolution does allow us to test these ideas.
You just brought up the Big Bang, which might illuminate a little bit of my perspective. But
that was my example. I'm not a cosmology person.
Right.
This is what I've read from.
It's the speed of the Big Bang that I would wonder if you would understand or have any perspective on.
I don't know.
Okay. If and maybe Peter, you do, but if I remember correctly, and I should have looked this up before we talked today, but if I remember correctly, the theoretical side of the Big Bang says that it happened at a very, very fast rate. Is that correct? Does anybody know that?
I mean, there were a lot of things going on shortly after it occurred, but I don't think anyone knows how. I don't know what you mean by how fast it was. They say there was like, we can look
faster than what we observe today. Faster than the expansion of the universe we observe today. That it was just almost an immediate expansion, very quickly, and now we've kind of moved into a more normal expansion.
I mean, I think that's probably more of a question for someone who knows a lot more about physics than me, because I'm a biology person. I think physics is intriguing, but I know very little about it.
The reason
I also am not aware of this claim. What we do know is that the expansion is slowing down, is speeding up still. So that wouldn't point to it being faster in the past, because we're still speeding up. It's still going faster and faster.
Yeah, where I was leading to with that, if I'm incorrect, then I'm incorrect. But if I remember correctly, the theory goes, and the science backs it up, the physics does, that the initial, if you might call it the explosion, expanded the universe at an extremely, incredibly extraordinary rate, and then it moved into a more normal expansion rate where we're at now. Now it's still expanding. It might be speeding up again, but my point with all that is to say that it kind of gives the example I'm giving of speeding up the making of that volcano. And would God have the ability to do that?
Well,
I'd like to correct on a couple of things, because I know that that's what happens on creationist websites, and so it wasn't an explosion. So we need to at least ditch that idea that something exploded, because it wasn't an explosion, and it was an expansion. And as far as we know, if something is expanding, it can either slow down, the expansion can slow down over time, or we're still in a beginning phase maybe, and it's still speeding up. And what we see is that it's still speeding up, but we don't have any evidence that it was expanding faster or slower in the past, because that's something we can't see, at least not yet. So I don't know where that claim came from, but this is absolutely the first time that I've ever heard that claim.
Yeah, I just Googled it and I haven't had time to really dig into it, but it seems like a lot of links will take you to the idea that the universe expanded at the speed of light at some point. It's making the argument how that's possible. I'm not digging into it here. I'm just
Okay.
Quick
Like I said, I don't know
looks.
anything about it.
yeah.
No.
The only reason I bring it up is to kind of maybe give an example of what I'm talking about. You know, how things can happen faster than move into more normal rates.
Well, so I have heard that argument before. Like, for instance, with radiometric dating, the claim is that it was much faster in the past. And with that example, for instance, radiometric dates the half-lives couldn't have been faster in the past. Otherwise, everything in the universe would be completely irradiated. Right? These things, we have no evidence to indicate that any things were slowing down or speeding up in either case. Or in a lot of cases, it's usually that they were much faster in the past and they've slowed down. And so this present rate is a much slower pace. The problem is we don't have any evidence to indicate that. You can one way is you can look at genetics, for instance. You can look at molecular clocks, and you can see, for instance, that even in by human migration alone, the Earth can't be younger than 10,000 years. It has to, because humans left Africa like 70,000 years ago, and then spread out, across the world and went different places. You had like the Aborigines reaching Australia like 40,000 years ago. Humans reached North America like 12 to 15,000 years ago. And so we can trace all this. And that's actually what, you have, and so there are different ways we can look at this. You can look at nuclear DNA. You can also look at mitochondrial DNA, and you can trace it back. And so from that alone, that is a way we can show that these things weren't extraordinarily faster in the past, and they can't be younger than 10,000 years. And that's actually when they use mitochondrial DNA and things like Ancestry.com. Figuring out where did your lineage come from, what part of the world, and that's one of the ways they look at your ancestry is using these things called mitochondrial haplogroups, which are these strands of mitochondrial DNA that have specific mutations, and you can trace them to specific geographic locations. So that's part of how they tell where your ancestry is or came from.
All good stuff. Thank you.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and
I've jotted down a whole bunch of things here to get the vital questions, the fragments of truth, the Mary Schweitzer stuff. I'm going to be digging into that stuff. That's great stuff to look into.
I discussed a bit of the vital question in Abiogenesis Part 2. Just talked about Mary Schweitzer's research and the videos that I provided Peter the links to. I also have videos on how evolution works, if you want to know how that works.
I've got that circled too. I'd like to see that. Is that on your site?
Yeah, it's on my channel. It's a series. It's still in progress. Actually, I should have another one out on it fairly soon in the near future, but I'm working on the second Cambrian Explosion video currently. So that should be out relatively soon. But yeah, so yeah, and what I always do in my videos is I always link to the evidence that I'm citing in the description. So if you want to check any of my sources, go ahead. I always cite what?
That's great. Thanks.
Yep. Yeah. I always cite my technical research, if I use a creationist source, I always cite it, which I do in my video, The Source Methods Approach. I look at a creationist or a few creationist sources, and I kind of pick them apart, show how they compare to each other. And so yeah, that's something I do. But yeah, so there's a ton of information out there on evolution, and Google Scholar is a great place to look for it because it's full of articles that have been peer reviewed. One of the problems with creationist sources generally is that they don't peer review their works. And so you can actually go on one of their sites and find two conflicting articles that that exist simultaneously, and they're not battling it out. They're just leaving the articles up.
Right.
Like Jason Lyle's idea that the starlight moves instantaneously. It like implies that Earth is the center of the universe. Geocentric, this sort of geocentrism. But then you look at I think it's Danny Faulkner, and he says no, geocentrism is not a thing. Or
Right.
at least in the sense that our solar system is not like the center of the universe. Right.
Right. No. Well, I said before that we started recording here that I hope I didn't disappoint. I feel like I've got an expert here that's just amazing in knowledge, and I'm just the average Joe here. So I hope I didn't bore you with our conversation, but it's been great for me. I've really enjoyed it.
Oh yeah, thank you. I always enjoy these conversations also. And one of the things I appreciate about this conversation is that like we were talking about last time we spoke, is that, and like you and Peter said, this isn't a battle, right? We're just talking about this sort of thing. We're not. It's not like when I did a chat recently with the other guys. Like I am here, to show that evolution is a fraud, right? And so, that's what I like these conversations, just chill discussions.
Yeah, I think the main goal of what we're trying to do here is to make people think. So I always like when people pitch me something I haven't heard, a claim that I haven't heard before, so I can go and check that out. I am always hoping that the people who come on our channel will check out the things that we provide. Most of the things we talked about, I've put links in the description, so there's a fair list of your videos already in the description, Jackson. So
well, it's all about me, Peter.
Well, I think you're doing a stellar job with your videos. So
thank you.
And not everyone can make a compelling video about whale sex just on a whim. So there's that.
Yes, Glenn, in case you don't know, I made a whole video about whale sex.
I'm heading there right now.
On the I was asked by 2 Canadians to make a video on whale sex.
Who later disclosed that they were a little bit tipsy or maybe even drunk when they asked it.
Maybe
it turned out to be a good video, and the question was made by a very good YouTuber.
He's great.
Paul G. So yeah,
be careful what you ask for, right?
Well, I do say people can request topics, and a fair number of my videos are requested topics, and I always put in the description, for so and so when they request a video.
Yeah,
like Trenton James requested the Chromosome 2 video, if I remember correctly. So yeah.
Okay, so we're coming up on an hour and a half, so I think it would be a good time to wrap this up, so we don't go too long, and we'll have at least a little bit more views than when we make 2 or 3 hour videos that usually doesn't end up being viewed that well. I want to thank you, Glenn, for coming on and for asking the questions that you had. I want to thank the people who are in the side chat. We did have a couple of theists in there, and I invited both to come on our channel, and it looks like both have accepted. So I'm
Who
very
is it,
much.
Peter?
It's someone I hadn't met before called Lamb and Tuna.
I don't know him.
So no, nor do I. So would be a good conversation because I don't know anything about him, but he seems to be a theist. And the other one is Chaos Theory. I bumped into him a couple of times now. That could be an interesting talk, if I can put it that way. We'll see what happens. Glenn, you'll be back this Friday with a
Yes.
topic of your choice, which you
Great.
won't reveal until we go live. So I'm looking very much forward to that one. I don't know if Charis will be available. Charis has some things she wanted to do over the summer, so she's a little bit less available than she usually is. But we'll see if Charis is there or not. So thanks everyone for watching, and hope to see you all this Friday, 7 Central, 7 p.m. Central, and we'll be back with Glenn, and Glenn will have a nice new topic to throw at us. So we'll see what happens. So thanks, Glenn, for coming. Thanks, Jackson, for being a guest moderator. Always welcome on our channel, and hope we can do a few more of these. And I have to throw in another comment. Godless Iowan said, I can see Jackson debating Ken Ham in the future.
Oh,
And
please. We'll never get him in a room with me.
I said I'll actually pay to see that. So maybe we should
So would I.
set up a GoFundMe to make that happen. Who knows? I need to say I did get into the conversation on the last Answers News thing. And I asked if I could interview Georgia Purdom, and I was given a link where I can put in a formal request. So if that
good luck with that.
happens, I'll be very excited, and I will definitely ask you, Jackson, to join me in on that one.
I would love to be there for that conversation. Yeah.
And maybe even ask PZ Myers to chip in.
Oh yeah. Oh yes, we would have to bring PZ, and that would be too much fun to resist. They're so secretive about letting their people do public talks over at AIG. They're very cautious about it.
Yeah, they do have a restriction that interviews can't be longer than 20 minutes. So maybe I'll just ask not for an interview, but for an entire feature show and see what happens next. But we'll see what happens. We're going to end it right here. Thanks everyone for coming, and make sure you tune in this Friday. And I'll just leave you with our final message. See you all.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Jackson.
Bye-bye.